Welcome to Ungrading in Canvas without points. Thank you for spending some of your valuable time. Whether you are here with me live or watching the recording, I'm going to be talking about two topics today: ungrading and Canvas without points. I will pause throughout and ask for questions, but don't hesitate to put any questions you have in chat. And I will also end with a resources document that has information on these topics with some, great articles and websites about ungrading in particular. I've got an asterisk on the title there because it's an important thing to know is that Canvas must have points for assignments. There must be a numerical value for assignments in Canvas, but you can hide those from students, and that's what today's topic is about because I want to talk about ungrading with Canvas. Ungrading without points. What am I saying? Grading without points in Canvas, which is a key part of ungrading. I'm going to start off with a quote from a student, and I'd like to get a volunteer to read this out loud. Someone mind doing that? Give me a hand raise.
I'll do it.
Okay, Andy.
I want to focus on your learning, and I do not like how letter grades and points take away from that focus. So this class follows an ungrading philosophy.
Thank you for reading that. This quote captures for me exactly why I do it. That's actually a quote from my syllabus. So my students see this in each of my classes. And so that kind of captures the why I do ungrading. The next slide is going to show you the principles that kind of motivate the how I do ungrading. The picture on the slide is a photo of a sign with two arrows. The one pointing right is labeled awesome, and the one pointing left is labeled less awesome. I'm going to show you how to do these things in Canvas. That's kind of the bulk of the time that we'll be spending today. But these are the kind of the how, is I want my assignment submissions to demonstrate learning and achievement. I want to focus on qualitative feedback for my students. I want to give them opportunities for resubmission. So that's an important part of this. And I want students to have total determination over the course grade. Now, in some ways, that's kind of always been true. And it's also, in some ways, never going to be true because we have to give them a letter grade at the end of the semester, right? Until the revolution finally happens. Um, and they also are the ones who determine what their grade is because they're the ones who are choosing to do the work. However, whatever help they get in doing the work, they're ones who are actually making the submissions. Um, so, um, uh, but I also like to think, right, if they have determination, I tell them this, right? It's part of that statement that I had at the prior slide. And so this is important for me again, how I do that. So I'm going to kind of go through this, and again, I'll pause as we go through, and I've got a course I'm ready to do some demonstration. So the first thing is to talk about the settings page in Canvas. Um, and there are two things to use to think about. One is there's a checkbox. I've got screenshots here. One is a checkbox to restrict the view of quantitative data. So we can do that. That hides numbers from students, all the numbers from students that are related to grades. And then the second thing is we need to make a new grading scheme. And a scheme is basically how the numbers are formatted. There is a Canvas default grading scheme for letter grades, and that assumes that we are able to give pluses and minuses, which we can't do for the course grade, but we certainly could for letter grades or for assignment grades. So there is a grade scheme that's there, but we can also create our own schemes, and that's what I'm going to show you and talk about that. The grading scheme diagram, the screenshot you see there, right? These are the components of a screen, of a scheme rather. It has to have a name, of course. The You can choose whether it's grade by percentage or points, and then you can decide what the symbol is for each of the letter grades. Now you see I've written the words complete, try again, and no submission. So those are the grades that I'm going to give my students in my ungrading philosophy, in my ungrading class. And then I chose percentage, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I chose percentage. I have to give them a percentage, right? What's the minimum percentage of points possible to get a complete? What's the range for each of the letters, right? Again, I've only got three symbols there. I've got those words, but you can imagine, A plus might be 97% and higher. A might be 94 to 97, A minus might be 90 to 93. Um, and we'll see that when we actually get into modifying, creating a grade scheme. And the reason that I have try again versus complete versus no submission is I want to be able to, to tell my students, right? I want them to see on the grades page what's the first point of feedback. No submission, that's pretty obvious. They didn't turn it in. Try again, okay, right? They didn't get it, they need to try again. And then finally, is it complete? And that completion percentage, that's a decision, of course, each of us would make. I chose 70% because to me, 70%, right? That's the lowest C. C is passing, passing is complete. Great. Did they complete the assignment? They got 70% or higher. I chose percentage and not points because each assignment in my class may have different points. Now, my students don't see the points, but I may need to use different points for different reasons. So I'll give you one example is like for my writing assignments, I'm going to make them each worth 2 points. And when I grade them, I'm either going to type in a two, a one. Actually, I'm only going to type in a two or a one because if they made a submission, then no matter how bad the submission is, they can try again. 1 out of 2 is 50%. 50% is smaller than, say, oh, perfect, right? That's going to be try again. That's what Canvas is going to put on the grades page for the students. And I'll see that too. If they get a 2 out of 2, which means they've completed it, great, they're getting a complete. I've just liberated myself from worrying about percentages and points and all this kind of stuff. I have the experience every semester of students who are like 89.9%. Is that an A? Sure, right? That's an A. Okay, 89.8, okay, 89.7. Okay. When do I stop with making that final adjustment? I never go the other direction though, right? I never say 90.1, I'm going to convert that to a B because despite how hard I try, I can't be cruel for any long period of time. I have students, Eddie, thanks for sharing. I have students submitting an assignment that is not for my course. I give them a 0. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good a reason for that. Now, I've got 3 examples in my thing here. You could have 4, and the third and fourth right could be different levels for that. But the percentage matters because the number that all I have to type in is a number, and then boom, it gets converted to the symbol. The reason I don't use percentage, I'm sorry, the reason I don't use points is because I also use quizzes. I have the multiple choice. Did you do the reading? Did you pay attention in class quizzes? And for those quizzes, I don't want to divide I don't want to divide my quiz and make each question worth 1/10 of a point because I got 20 questions. That's going to add up to 2. No, no, no. They're going to be 1 point questions. And if they get 70% of those, right, that's the C grade, whatever. So that's why I like to use the percentage and not the points. Oh, thank you, Naomi. Sometimes they submit a blank or unreadable file. Exactly. Okay, so that is that. And I'm going to pause here. I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to pause and see if you get additional questions. So here's my sandbox course I'm working with. So there are 2 things on the settings page, right? Go to settings, and I will choose restrict view of quantitative data. So that's a checkbox here, quantitative data options, right underneath participation. And then also I'm going to go to grading scheme. I'm going to enable a course grading scheme. So until I enable one, there isn't one. And I need to, oh, sorry, that's the license. So here's my default, sorry, here's my enable course grading scheme. I'm going to create a new grading scheme, right? I'm going to create this a new one. These get copied from course to course like other settings when we do this for new semester. And you can see the Canvas default, right? A, oh, they don't even have A plus, 100 to 94. There's a D minus down to 61%. Okay, so I'm going to say my new grading scheme, I'm going to call it ungrading. And I'm going to try giving my students not just words, but I'm going to put a little colorful symbol. So I need to open up my emoji thing. And I'm going to say that if they are complete, they get a green button. So let's go here. There it is. So that's going to be like I showed you, right? 100 to 70%. Try again. I'm going to give them a yellow button. And I'm going to write the words try again. And that's going to be from 70 to 1%. And then I'm going to carefully select the delete buttons for all these other options and until I get down to the default F, and that's going to be a red button, and it's no submission. Okay.
How are you
Red,
getting the
yellow.
buttons?
How am I getting the buttons? I'm on a Mac and I opened up the special characters window to do that. If I were on a Windows computer, I think the same thing is option. There is an emoji button. In fact, I just learned this. I have a Windows computer at work in my office. Windows key plus the period. Windows period opens up a dialog that has characters. I assume that the buttons are available there too because right, the emojis are there is a standards body that sets what those are.
Where are they
Right.
on the Mac?
On the Mac, if you go to the edit menu, there's an option called emojis and symbols. And
Edit
depending,
in Canvas or edit where?
no, I'm in Chrome. I'm using the Chrome browser, and there's an edit menu at the top of the page, and edit
Oh,
special emojis and symbols is an option there.
so you have to be under Chrome.
Yeah, yeah, because any browser will have that. Any
Oh,
browser
If
should
you
have.
go, yeah, go all the way to the top bar. Uh, for me, I'm using Safari right now. Sorry. It's where you see a little A plus and it says show emoji and symbols. That's what it shows for me. In the very
oh,
top.
okay, I see it. Thank you. I'm on
Yeah.
Okay.
Safari as well.
Okay. Yeah, and Safari is a perfectly acceptable browser. It works. It works well. Those folks at Apple, uh, they're pretty good at software development too. Okay. So I'm creating a new scheme, right? Remember, I went to the settings page. I selected I want to create a new scheme. I'm editing the symbol, course grading, okay, ungrading. That makes sense. I hit save. So now you can see here the checkbox, right? Enable course grading scheme. Ungrading is selected, which means that's the default grading scheme when I choose letter grade. So that's something that took me a minute to kind of get over that hump, right? I want to do this ungrading thing. What do you mean I have to choose letter grade? Because Canvas says if you want the score to display as, right, that's an option we have in assignments, which of course I'll show you. One of the options is letter grade. Because this is the default for this course, when I select letter grade, the default will be ungrading. It's possible to have multiple grading schemes, so you can use different schemes for different assignments. There's nothing wrong with that. I can imagine, and I've done this in the past where I tell my students, look, there are two types of complete. There's complete like, yeah, you got the minimum points, and there's complete like, you know what, complete, but I really want you to read this feedback. Or I think I even said almost there was what I said it because they just miss one little tiny thing like they're they didn't properly format the works cited list. And I think that's really important. And I want them, but that's such a little tiny thing that I'm going to try this semester. This is it. It's either try again or no submission, or it's complete. And I really like those ideas that you shared. I think it was Eddie and Naomi about the other things that could constitute no submission. Okay. Oh, I forgot to hit update course details. So let me do that. And then come back to my my presentation and see if there are any questions.
I do, Greg.
Yeah.
So when we create an assignment, does that show, is that how it shows in the grade book? Like,
Yeah.
okay. So the students will see as either complete, try again, or no
Yeah.
submission.
Yeah.
It's not, is it similar to that complete, incomplete that we can choose
Yes.
from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And thanks for mentioning that. So one of the display as options is complete, incomplete, right? That's the Canvas option that's built in. And if they get complete, they get a green check mark. And if it's incomplete, there may be a black X. I'm not sure what that symbol is. The problem with complete, incomplete is complete is always 100% of the points, always. And there's no
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah. Okay.
No, I like this. This is way better because I always wish there was something in between, complete, incomplete, and almost there, something like that.
Yeah.
So this is good. Thank you.
So
Mm-hmm.
how would you toggle back and forth if most of my assignments are graded and there are just a few that I want to basically do either complete, incomplete, or your option of try again. How would you do that for
Yeah,
for individual assignments?
great question. You choose the grading scheme for each assignment. Or I should say, the grading scheme is correct. What I should have said is you choose display as, that's an option for every assignment. How is the score going to be displayed to students? The default in Canvas is points. So if you do nothing, it's going to be points. They're going to see, 5 out of 10, 8 out of 11, whatever it is. But you can choose to display as complete and complete, or you can choose this grading scheme as I'm mentioning.
So that's on when you're creating the assignment on Canvas. You can
Uh-huh.
choose that. Can you show us that view?
Boy, it's like I hired you to say the right thing at the right time. It's exactly what I'm doing next. So these are settings for the Canvas courses. The next question is, Jane, you asked a question about rubric. Yes, that's going to come. That's coming as well. The next question is, what are the settings for the individual assignments? And you see here, I'm gonna break out quizzes separately, but I'm talking first about graded discussions and assignments. When you create or edit a graded discussion or an assignment, again, it must have points. So that's a requirement for any of this to work. The points possible don't matter because remember, I hid quantitative data from students. So my students aren't going to see that they're not going to care that my 15-page paper is only worth 2 points. They're only going to see complete or try again or no submission. And they're not going to care that my quiz is worth 20 points. Wait, how can a quiz that's multiple choice ticky tack worth 20 points, but the writing paper is worth 2 points? Oh my gosh, Professor Byer, you're insane. No, they're not going to see the numbers at all, right? They're only going to see complete or incomplete. And this is part of the ungrading philosophy, the ungrading practice that I'm really focused. I want my students to focus on, are they learning? And that's going to be done one assignment at a time. And don't, yeah, there is a course grade, and I'll talk about how they do that at the end. But I want them on the assignment itself, right? How hard do I need to work for this? Because if I work really hard, I get a high score. No, no, no. I want you to focus on learning. It's either complete or incomplete. Sorry, complete or try again. So for each assignment or graded discussion, there's an option you can see here, display grade as, right? So, and again, I'll show this to you, but this is from the screenshot. So they have to be points. Display grade as letter grade. And again, for me, that was a little bump I had to get over to remember it's letter grade, even though I'm not giving them a letter grade, because letter grade comes with all the terror of letter grades, which I certainly grew up with going back to high school when I wanted to get into college. And then you choose your grading scheme. As you can see the screenshot, and this will hopefully show up when I show you the demo. That the word course default is the default, but I could select other schemes if I wanted to. And then here are two other things that I mentioned at the bottom, and this is part of ungrading because remember, I want my students to resubmit if they get to try again, right? If I'm going to give them the opportunity to try again, they have to be able to try again, which means every assignment has unlimited attempts. And I tell my students that I treat dates as guidelines, not deadlines. I do not have penalties for late submissions because that, to me, flies in the face of ungrading. That violates the philosophy, the principles of doing that. If they're going to try again, then they should be able to try again until they complete the assignment. And of course, feedback is part of that and helping them and do that. So these are the settings that I do in my assignments. So I'll show that to you now. I'm going to take an existing assignment. I have a writing assignment called Edit the Textbook. And you can see here that it's worth 14 points. It has a rubric. Okay. And so I'm going to edit it. And the first thing I'm going to do is change it from 14 points to 2. Because I have to regrade submissions. That's fine. I use the same course in my earlier workshop today. So that's why I'm seeing that message. And the reason I'm making it 2 is that I don't need to do math. All I need to remember is 2 is complete, 1 is try again. 2 is complete, 1 is try again. If they submit a blank file, they get a 0 for no submission, right? That's all I need to know. I don't need to remember it. What's 70% of 14? Whatever. No. I don't want to do that. Wait a minute, Greg. What about rubrics? Okay, I'm actually going to say don't use rubrics for grading. Use rubrics for feedback, absolutely, but not for grading, because if you use rubrics for grading, Then you have to figure out how many points is this criterion versus that criterion versus this rating versus that rating. And if I click here and I click there, are they going to? Yeah, I did this last semester and in the summer, and it was a pain in the butt to have to go through all that. So 2 points, right? Again, so all I need to remember is that every student's getting a 1 or 2, and then display grade as. Aha, letter grade, right? Not complete, incomplete, not percentage. No, okay, no, I want letter grade, and ungrading is the course default. Perfect. Okay. And I've already got a due date. That's fine. So now I hit save. And now I need to regrade those submissions, right? Because it did say that. So let me go to SpeedGrader. I've got one submission that needs to be regraded. Eddie, you got a comment. Yeah, I'll speak to that. Who I think it was a test student who was graded before. Oh, look at that. It's already a complete, right? You see that, the green? What can I do to make that? Oh, because I have rubric grading rubric turned on. Yeah. Let's skip the test student. We're going to come back to that. Let's come back. Just go straight to the grade book. Excuse me. There's that symbol with the color and everything. So if I give this student a different score, remember 0, 1, or 2, if I give them a 1, it's try again. If I give them a 0, no submission. If I give them a 2, complete. Now, this student had 11 out of 14. Remember, I graded that earlier. You didn't see me do it, but this was this morning or earlier this afternoon. And so that became, instead of 11 out of 14, it became 11 out of 2. Well, that's complete, right? It's greater than 70%. So this is what this looks like on this end. Let's see what the students see. So if I click on Frodo and I click on the View Grades button, Frodo's got a complete. This is my first time adding the colored buttons. I really like this. Last semester, I was using keyboard character. I had the tilde character for try again, and then I had a check mark for complete. And there wasn't enough visual. I mean, yeah, this is only for students who are privileged with sight, but I happen to be privileged with sight, and I really like the visual of this demonstration. And then check this out on the grade book. I go back to the grades view. I'm going to have a whole bunch of colored buttons, and that'll give me a nice visual overview of what my students see. Okay. You're right, Naomi. A typical color vision, that's true. For students who are low vision or who are using a screen reader, they see the words. Try again, right? No submissions. So I'm not worried about them not getting information. Okay, Eddie mentions no submission range should be 0 to 0.99. Yeah, Canvas is, and I do love numbers, Eddie, so thank you for the calculation for the 70%. Canvas is smart enough with the grade scheme that it's either greater than or equal to, or it's less than or equal to. So 0.7 or higher in my case will be marked as complete. If they get 0.6999999, whatever their limit is, it'll be marked as try again. So they've kind of built that in. And the same thing in that middle one, right? 1%. If they get 0.000999, yeah, they'll get the score of no submission. Okay. So that makes sense so far to me, and I want to make sure I got that right. Oh, unlimited attempts. Did I do that? Let me make sure that's right. Edit. I think I do this anyway because even if I allow late submissions or even if I give them a penalty, right, I'm going to have unlimited attempts for that. Yeah, allowed attempts, unlimited. Yeah. All right. So let me come back here. I got a question from Mike.
Yeah, we were talking about the rubrics. Could you do the same scheme inside a rubric? Like if we were doing an essay rubric where uh did they address the topic? So they got complete, try again, or incomplete. Did they get the grammar complete, try again on the grammar, spelling, try again on the spelling, or something like that. Could something like that be arranged?
Yes, it can. I'll use your example when I do the demo. And I heard spelling. I think you listed 3 criteria, right? You had spelling. What were the other 2?
I was just putting out some possible values for the rubric.
Yeah. So spelling, but go ahead. Say your values again. I'm gonna try to make this interactive.
Um, Topic, spelling,
Top,
and grammar.
perfect. Topic, spelling, and grammar. Okay, so I'll remember those. Yeah, The short answer is yes. And you can even be more descriptive in a rubric than you can in this. Now, you could be descriptive in a scheme too. I like the simplicity of a scheme because it kind of focuses my students and me, right? It's either try again or it's complete. Within the rubric, you can be as descriptive as you want and have as many ratings as you want, and you'll see that when I do rubrics. And I think that actually might be next. Can audio be added to the say green button as well as complete? No. Oh, you're saying audio, Eddie? I'm thinking of a screen reader. I don't know what screen readers do with emojis. Um, I've heard that emojis are accessible, so I don't worry about it. I don't think about it after that. But I don't know what the screen readers say. They may say green button or green circle. That may be what it is. But they would say green button complete. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh, rubrics. Perfect. That was next. Okay. So here's ungrading with rubrics. Yes, you can have rubrics with ungrading. You can actually use rubrics. You can use rubrics to grade. You can do that. However, you then have to think for how many criteria do you have and how do the points add up. So I did this past semester. I was doing ungrading. I was using rubrics. That's why that's 14. My discussions were 14 points. My writing assignments were 36, not because 36 versus 14 is some, appropriate ratio of the amount of work the students were doing and that kind of stuff. I had to use 36 because I told my students like you see this screenshot here, I told my students you have to meets expectations on all the rubric criteria in order for your assignments to be marked as complete. And I did a lot of painful trial and error to figure out if I click here, but not there, do they get it right? No. So now I'm glad I had that experience because that makes me more confident in saying, just don't do grading. So there's a checkbox here when you're editing or creating a rubric that says remove points from rubric. I would do that. You still have the rich feedback that you give to students for the multiple criteria, like I have here. I've got some throwaway language there, but in the demo, I'm going to use your 3 criteria that you shared. So you still have that opportunity, and you can even see things like exceeds expectations versus meet expectations. So it's possible to distinguish between high quality student submissions and, okay, they got it done, student submissions, versus try again. Or you can see here, I added a level here called almost there, because sometimes I want my students to be encouraged. There's just a little bit more you need to do versus, you know what, you give me a blank piece of paper, you should try again, right? Whatever the really low quality submission they have. So that can be done within the rubrics. And in order to spare myself the mental gymnastics and the practicing of my math equations, for this semester, I'm going to do this checkbox here, remove points from rubric. I don't want to have to worry about it. Yeah, as I'm reading my student submissions, I'm marking the rubric criteria and saying this and this. And then at the end, before I give them a grade, I can then look at the rubric overall and say, yeah, you know what? That was complete. Boom, I'll give them 2 points. Okay. So let me do some demonstration there. Let's see. I think I've made changes here, but just in case, I'll hit save. And so this rubric, this assignment has a rubric already. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 criteria. I'm going to, it says you've already rated students to the rubric. Any major changes could affect their, that's fine. Yes, this is a sandbox class. Thank goodness. These aren't real students. So I'm editing a rubric. This could be creating it. And there's a checkbox here, remove points from rubric, right? Use it rubric. So this is what I normally do. And this is what I have done. Use this rubric for assignment grading. And you can see the points here, right? 1.55111. Okay, so that adds up to 14 and whatever. They get some score. Yeah. Now, I'm just going to say remove points from rubric, update. And now when I give students feedback, so let's go to SpeedGrader. And let's pretend that Eleanor has submitted something, right? Why does that say 14? It should say 2. Well, what's going on, Greg? It still says 14 points, so maybe I didn't save that change. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's it. It's a 2-point assignment. I thought I made this change earlier because I got that warning about if you change it as soon as possible. Okay, fine. I won't worry about that. Let me make it 2 points and hit save.
before the semester where I change the points and then it reverts and I have to change it a second time
You've experienced that?
and a couple of times this past semester. So there might be a little glitch in the system.
Yeah, I think that might relate to the rubric because this I did have points with this rubric. That's I just copied this over from my last class, and I think that might be trying to override it, especially probably because I already have some students who've been marked, even if it's my test student. So Canvas is trying to keep that sane. Yeah, Linda.
Um, this is a little off topic, but it has to do with right there, comments. My question is, if you leave comments for a student under, assignment comments, do
Yeah.
they get notification that you've given comments? Because most of the time I get the impression like my students didn't get my comments or they're not reading them. So I'm wondering, is that in notifications or how do you know the student actually, like they may just accept the grade, they see the grade, that's it. Do they actually have to go to this page to see the comments?
Yes. They have to go to the grades page to see the comments. They do get it by default. They are notified when comments are made. They can turn off their notification settings. I think what's likely happening in your experience, this is my experience too, is they don't even see the comments. Or I'm sorry, they don't read the comments.
They don't
And
read them, but they actually do get notified that your professor has made a comment.
that's right.
Okay, that
That's
was
right.
my question. Because I know when they've left a comment, but I wasn't sure if they actually knew that I had left them a comment.
Yeah. I wish that my students paid more attention to what I tell them. And I know that some of them don't. Okay. So I'm going to give Eleanor Gamgee some feedback here. Let's pretend that the student submitted something. You see there, right? 2 points. Okay, great. I know 2 is complete. 1 is try again. Okay. So view rubric. I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah. Okay. Let's try again over there. Proficient. Okay. I told my students in the assignment instructions for this particular assignment, they have to get at least proficient in all of the rubric criteria in order to complete the assignment. In this example, I have a student who, you know what? They got try again on this part of the assignment criteria. So when I hit save, right, this is what the students see. They would see my comments, but there is not yet a score. In this example, I know what I need to do, type a 1, because that's try again. And now if I take a look at what my student sees, so let's go to Eleanor and look at Eleanor's grades. Here, Linda, here's a challenge that students have. And I say a challenge, it requires them to be a bit more thorough when they want to see our comments, because this is what the student sees in the gradebook, right? This student logged in and she sees, oh, I got a score of try again. Okay. Oh, what's this? Oh, they have to click on this button to view the rubric. And I didn't give the student a comment. So they would have to click on, there's another button over here for comments. So the comments don't appear like in the old grade. This is a change in structure made in the grade book in the past year or so. It used to be that the comments would appear automatically, but they don't now. The students have to click on a button to view the comments. So
Ah,
let
so
me,
they don't get an email saying your
oh,
professor has
no,
left
they
a
do. Yeah,
comment.
they
Oh,
do get notified, but when they get to this page, they have to do an extra click to see the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
didn't even know that you had that type of viewing.
yeah.
And
So I
it's
may not be
different.
the only person, but
Let
It's
me give
different if
Eleanor
they're
some
using the
comments. Yeah.
phone too. If they're using the phone, is a little bit more complicated for them to see it. And
That's
that's
right.
what most students are using is the phone.
Mm-hmm. They can view comments on the phone. They can see all this on the phone, but you're right. It is. So I'm writing some comments here. Assignment from Eleanor Gamgee. Okay, I'll give her a. Oh, I don't want to give her a kissy face. Let's see. I'll do the mask. Maybe she got sick. I don't know. Whatever. So let me hit submit. Okay, now let's take a look at what Eleanor sees. Right, this student. So I click on the student's name. No, I can't do this. I click on the student's name. In the tray, I click on grades. So this is basically the same thing that students see when they do this. And you can see that there's that comment bubble. So the student has to click on the button to view the comment. And that's extra clicking. And students don't always write. They want to just often, or yeah, too often, I think they want to get it done. Remember, I chose the course setting to display to hide numerical stuff, right? Uh, calculation totals has been disabled. So from the student's perspective, there are no numbers on this page. Right? No numbers are for the score. This is all right. Keeping the focus hopefully on switching this from try again to complete. Okay, let me see. I got
Now,
a couple of comments in the
oh,
chat. Uh, Eddie said go to assignments. Eddie, that was a few minutes ago. I don't know what that was for. Yeah, they get a notification. How do you state how this works in the syllabus? Yeah, I'm going to show that to you, or I'm happy to share with you my syllabus. Yes, I can't remember if it's in my presentation, but absolutely. Of course, I explain all this in the syllabus. And that quote that was in my presentation, right? The quote that Annie read aloud, that's part of the syllabus. I tell them, look, I'm not going to do grades for assignments. There's no numbers here. You will determine your course grade by, and I did it different last semester than I did this semester. They are going to submit a final assignment. Basically, what's my course grade? I call it self assessment. What's my course grade or self evaluation? What's my course grade? And I tell them it's in the syllabus and it's in the assignment instructions. You're going to tell me the grade that you earned. And the evidence to support your assertion is I'm going to tell them count the green buttons on this page. How many green buttons, how many yellow buttons? It's more nuanced than what I just said. But basically, they're the ones who are, I'm teaching them to make an argument using evidence. Oh my gosh, what is that? That's thinking. I'm helping create human beings by how that they're not just getting some grade that I'm giving to them. Even though my syllabus is used to say in 900, 1,000 points is what I always do that. 1,000 points, 900 is an A, 800 is a B, 700 is a C. And whatever the number is that's the score, that's the grade they got. I'm empowering them and I'm requiring them to value their own work and to state what they are. And I'm going to share with you some student feedback on all this at the end of this. So I hope that helps with that question, Jane. It's not it requires it requires it required me to rethink how I do feedback and grades. So yes, that required me to do a lot of work, and I was probably thinking the same thoughts and had the same feelings that a lot of you had as you're looking, hearing me explain this. It also required me to be careful, as I always try to do, but of course I sometimes mess up, to be careful with how I explain this to students. And it required me to have what's that word, grit, or to be there's a word that begins with P that I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it required me to kind of stick with this as students complain. So here's a real situation that came up last fall. I can't remember it happened in the summer, and I course corrected midway through. And the situation is students who do grade checks, right? We have students who have to get a grade in the middle of the semester, and these are our student athletes. They're students in certain programs. They have to do grade checks with all the professors. And the first student who did this is early in the fall. I think it was the email about the athletics grade check. And I was like, oh boy, let me give them a grade. Let me kind of figure out my own thing. And then I just did it for them. The second student who had a grade check come up, by that time I was like, no, I want to empower students. So I told the students, what grade do you think you're earning right now? Here are the assignments that have been done, that have been due so far. You can go to the grades page and you can look at how you've been, all my feedback on your assignments. So it required me to kind of let go of some of the things that I'm used to handling on behalf of my students. So it hasn't been smooth, the right way to say it. Yeah, and again, I'll get some feedback. I'm going to share with you some student feedback at the end here. Okay.
Greg, I do have a quick question about the rubric.
Yeah.
Let's say you do have your old rubric that is 14 points, right? And the student got 11 out of 14. Would it still show like try again or complete?
It would if I made it if I left it as a 14-point assignment.
Uh-huh.
And then and you can use rubrics for grading, right? That is possible. And again, I did this last semester. You can do it that way. And then that 11 out of 14 would be try again. Because I know that
Okay.
because that's greater than 9.8, which is 70% of 14.
So you will still show as complete, try
Yeah.
again, or okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Now let me ask, what do you do if a student claims to have earned an A, even if they have multiple try agains? Yeah. So, or says an A when they only produce satisfactory, not excellent work. Yeah, that's a great question. Here's what I did last semester, and this I thought by doing ungrading, one of the goals for me as a professor is it's supposed to make things easier for me because the students are doing. I mean, they should be doing the work anyway, right? My work is in teaching and giving them feedback, right? Organizing the course, curating the resources, delivering lectures, whatever it is. They're the ones who are doing the work of getting the work, and if they can explain their own work, right, that's all better for them, for their critical thinking, their assertion, la. So, yes, I had the experience of students who were like, yeah, I think I got an A, and here's my evidence for my A, and I got 20 try agains and 5 completes, and I think I got an A. And I found myself, it wasn't a lot of students, but there were some students who asked for a higher grade than I think they actually earned. And I had a few students who undersold themselves, who were like, oh my gosh, I think I was last fall, I think I had 45 assignments and I had one student I only got 44 completes. And I think I only get a B. And so, yeah, I had to, as I would do anyway, right? I'm the one who's deciding the actual grade. So I had to compare this, compare that. So that was a challenge. And I had a student I actually had a student who didn't grieve me, although maybe they wanted to, I'm not sure. But we had an email back and forth several times. Hey, I thought I got an A. I said I got an A, but you gave me a B. What's up with that? And I quoted them from my self evaluation assignment where I said, this is what an A grade, here's an example of what an A grade looks like. Here's an example of what a B grade looks like. Here's an example of a C. You've done these things, you've done those things. And this student clearly had not done the thing. And I also, for every student that I disagreed with, right, on that self evaluation assignment, in the comments, I told them, the comments, I commented the letter grade that I gave them. I just put the letter. But if I disagreed with what they said, I told them why. I gave you a B instead of an A because, right, blah, blah, blah. I gave you a B instead of a C because, blah, 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 right? And I gave them some reasons. So they know from me the rationale behind the grades, which is something I had professors when I was an undergrad who didn't provide any rationale for grades. Oh my God. And that was frustrating because how do I learn, right, if I'm not getting rationale? So thank you for asking that question, Naomi. That response from Eddie. How do you address the requirement of providing midterm grades to all students? We still have to, in the end, give the letter grade. Do you let them know a midterm letter grade? No, I don't, because I don't think we have to give them an actual letter grade for midterm for in the middle of the class. I think the regulation says that we have to give them evaluation or feedback, and they have that every time they do an assignment, they're getting feedback from me. So they know what their grade is at any time. Um, can you show the screen for submission times? How do you handle that? You mentioned suggested dates, but not due until the end. Yeah, the due dates within Canvas are the same as they are with or without ungrading, without allowing late attempts. And I still have the late policy in my gradebook that gives them a 0 if they are late. At midnight, 11:59 p.m., I think it's 11:59 and 59 seconds Pacific time. At that moment, without a submission, they get a 0. Or in this case, it's going to be a no submission. They get a notification. I didn't do well, great. That helps, encourages them to let them know. They already know because they've read the syllabus, right? That I treat deadlines more like guidelines. And so, to the extent that students are reading, their minds should be at ease. Should they be stressed about getting stuff work done on time? Yes, because also part of my feedback, and this is in the syllabus, I say, look, you getting stuff done on time, that's going to help you be a more successful student. Because if you get your stuff done on time, I'll be able to give you feedback so that in your second submission for the second assignment, that's the same structure, right? You'll do better, all this kind of stuff. So that is how I kind of deal with that. That's kind of how I'll say this way, that when I started accepting late assignments without penalty, I was worried that I would get students who would wait and wait and wait, and I didn't. And what instead I got was I got an opportunity to help students pass a class who otherwise would have given up. And I've heard from multiple students who have said that. If you had a no tolerance policy, Professor Byer, I would have dropped your class. I wouldn't have learned. I still insist that they complete, right? They're still meeting the outcomes and all that. And yes, there are some students who do. I mean, it's a few students who kind of do a lot of work. I've had students who have, tried to cram in so much work in the last couple of weeks that they don't have time to respond to the feedback to do a better job. And that is a consequence of how they manage their time and how they are able to, where they prioritize my class among all the other stuff that they're doing. Does a complete have the potential to mislead students into thinking they're getting an A? No, because I tell them in the syllabus, you're not going to know your grade until the end of the class, and your grade is going to be determined by you arguing for a letter grade based on what you get. Could a student get 70% on every single thing and get an A in the class? I guess so, but I don't give them 70%, right? For my writing assignments, they're getting complete, which could be perfect. So here's a decision that I had to make that each of us would have to make who tries this is if I'm going to do complete or try again, right? If those are the two symbols my students are getting, I have to be comfortable with and hopefully consistent with what constitutes a complete assignment. What constitutes a complete assignment, right? My students do a lot of writing. So what do I have? I have these criteria, spelling, topic, and grammar. What do? I have my students, I actually don't require quality writing anymore because if they use AI as quality writing, I don't worry about that. I have my students, they have to cite sources, right? They have to provide references, they have to quote, they have to provide a works cited list, they have to primary source analysis, they have to describe the context, they have to describe the content, they have to analyze the meaning. So those are the criteria that I use. And then I have to decide, well, here's a paper that a student did and they have a nice, they have good support for their argument, but they don't have any citations. Well, that to me is not complete because you have to have citations. I've got another student who did the writing, they have the citations. Oh, but you know what? Their works cited list is not alphabetized. Or they forgot to include the date accessed when they have a work citation from an online source. Is that enough for something to be try again? It might be in your class. I know in mine it isn't. That to me that's a little the ticky-tack stuff. The way that I think about writing assessment is if it's something that when you become a professional writer, if your editor can help you with it, then I'm not going to knock you down for missing it, right? I want you to know it. So let me say more about what I just said. Remember the writing, the criteria in my rubric, right? As I've got on the screenshot here, exceeds expectations, meet expectations. I do give them that feedback. Hey, your works cited list is not properly formatted. You've got to, use the last name first. That's something that my students do a lot. They do first name, last name, or whatever. Or I might say, you know what? In this class, when you do a parenthetical reference, I only need the last name of the first author. You don't need to include the page number, whatever the things are. I give them that feedback within the rubric and the assignment comments. And I say, hey, you know what? You could be better. Here are the things you can do, right? But they've still done enough to complete the assignment. Yeah. If all completes lead to an A, do you have a bifurcated distribution at the end, or does it all still fall out across the range of grades? It still falls out across the range of grades. That's a great question, Naomi. I have not compared my grade distribution pre and post doing ungrading. So I've done ungrading for 2 terms. I did it in the summer and I did it in the fall. This semester is going to be my 3rd. I've got years and years of not doing ungrading before. And so maybe in a year or so, I'll do a comparison and I'll see if my grade analysis is different. What is true, whether it's ungrading or grading, students still have to do the work. And the students who get the C's and the D's and even the B's, they're just not doing all the work. My philosophy about grading, and I've had this for several years, is that my job as a professor is to get you, the student, to a C, because a C means you've passed the class. That's what I care about. I want you to earn that C, to get that C. If you want a B or an A, great, do some extra work, because I don't think that the quality, that the excellence or the talent, that to me is not what I'm grading. I'm not looking for talents. I'm looking for students who are learning. And I think that any student can learn and all that. So that's kind of my own philosophy on this. If a person, we have colleagues, and I have been this way myself, there's something really special about an A student who's going to do A quality work and they're going to be there and all that kind of stuff. if I had that attitude still, I would not be doing this workshop because I'm trying to empower, right? I want all my students to feel welcome, to feel that they can learn, and I want to recognize that they've learned through completion of assignments. Great, great questions. Okay, one more, and then I'm going to move on. Thanks, Jane, for asking this question. Do you do big midterm and finals, and are those weighted differently compared to other assignments? That's a great question. The answer is no. I don't do big midterms or finals. I have long dispensed with the exercise in regurgitation that was the final exams that I took when I was an undergrad. It was just a question and just dump out all the stuff that I think my professor taught me during the semester, maybe organized, and hopefully they'll give me a good grade. I I had those the first part of my teaching career. I hated it because my students couldn't get any feedback. It was too late for them to respond because that was the last assignment, right? So what I do instead is I have a whole bunch of little assignments. My students are doing assignments 2 days a week. And so again, I think last semester, I think I had 43 or was it 53? And those assignments include shorter papers. I don't do a big 10 or 15 page research paper. I have my students write, several shorter essays. And then the final exam, they do a big summative assessment. So that is where they kind of collect all of their stuff that they've learned and they present it and I give them a couple of weeks at the end of the semester to get that done. And it's scaffolded. So there are parts, right? There are assignments that kind of build up to that. I also have the prior assignments they've been doing the whole semester, kind of, help them get little pieces done. So when they put this big thing together, doesn't feel so big. And then for the final exam, I actually have two final exams that my students do. One is a feedback survey, and it's all questions about me, including ungrading, which you'll see some results from. And then the second question is a reflection. What did you learn? What was the challenge? Um, how will you use what you learned in this class in your other classes or in other parts of your life? Because I want my students, right, reflecting on learning is really important for their metacognitive development. Um, does the ungrading make it more difficult later to write reference letters for students in large classes? No, it makes it easier because remember, the other final assignment, I should say, so last semester I actually did not do the reflection. Instead, I had that self-evaluation. They're basically writing their own letter of recommendation because they're saying, look, I took this class and this is how I showed that I met outcome one and outcome two and outcome three. And this is how I contributed to the community, right? They're kind of writing their own thing. So if a student asks me for a letter of recommendation, I can just look at their submission and say, yeah. In other words, instead of looking at a number, and yeah, I could see that a student got 93%, so they got an A, so therefore they were a good student, and that's the letter of recommendation, I guess. Am I really going to go through and look at that student's every single assignment and kind of put together how they developed in there as an intellect and as a scholar over the course of the semester? No, I'm not going to do that because when I teach, I am an adjunct faculty. I teach overload. So I don't get paid like you full-time instructional faculty do. You guys have lots of time to write detailed letters of recommendation for students. Thank you for laughing, Eddie. I seriously, I try to take seriously that when I get paid as an adjunct, that's my pay rate for my overload teaching. I give my students that level of effort reflecting the amount I'm getting paid, which is not as much as I get paid for my full-time job, right, per hour. And so I'm happy to give them as much work as possible because the more work they do, the more they will learn, the better people they will become. Yeah. Okay. Eddie, got a question.
Just an anecdote. I transferred from a community college to the university with a cohort of people that I hung around with at the community colleges. And I think one of the reasons most of them, if not all of them, didn't end up completing their college degree is because they had a sense that they could do more than they could actually do. So when they got to the university, they couldn't do the coursework that was required at that level. And so I'm really concerned that we may be inflating their sense of academic achievement, which will lead to a devastating result when you have to go back home and say, oh, I went to the university, but I couldn't make it through.
Yeah. I think that's a valid question. I choose not to solve the world's problems in my single classes, right? I'm doing what I can to help the students get through my class. I think that I know that current polling data, this is nationwide, not just Republicans, In America, they don't value higher education. They've been fed a series of stories about, especially four-year colleges, how poorly they're educating people and not being able to. It comes from not being able to find jobs. It comes from the political, the political rhetoric about the content of what is being taught at universities. It comes from the lack of job preparation that employers complain about, and I think that um, there is a systemic challenge to higher ed in making it. Right now, we're at a moment where the people, when people think of college, of course, they don't think of community college in general. General people think about four-year colleges, and they think about whether it's the rock climbing walls that are being built in the student centers, and how does that help my student become an engineer or a future lawyer, right? Those are the kinds of things that are motivating the questions that lead to the kinds of dismissal of higher ed. What I hope I do in my class with ungrading, and this has been part of my assignment instructions before ungrading, is I encourage students to get to know themselves and what they can handle and how they can document their learning. This is what I have done, right? This is how I have achieved whatever in this class. And I'm trying to teach them skills that they can apply to the other classes. I don't teach in a discipline where, they take history one before they can take history two, like in probably in economics, I'm assuming. I know that's true in the sciences and in math, right? You can't take calculus until when I was in high school, you couldn't take calculus until you passed trig, which you couldn't take until you passed geometry, which you couldn't take until you passed algebra, right? There's a step up in that. I know that there are people who teach in those fields who use ungrading. The resources I'm going to share with you, there are articles about that. But if I focus on learning and the demonstration of skill achievement, that should be what will get them through that next level. Yeah, so great question. Okay, I know that my session's supposed to go until 3:15. Yeah, 2:58. Yeah, I should be fine. Okay, quizzes. What about quizzes, Greg? You haven't talked about quizzes yet. I say keep your quiz question points. So you can see a screenshot here from a 20-point quiz. I'm going to keep it a 20-point quiz, because I've already decided that 70% is what constitutes complete. That's a C. That's good enough for me. Get 17 out of get 14 out of 20 rather for your score. You've completed the quiz. Same grading scheme as before, letter grade, but there's no quantitative data visible. So instead of telling my students, and this is a mistake that I made last semester, and this is how I know, Linda, that my students don't read, that no one complained about this, but in my quiz instructions, I said, you must get 14 out of 20 to complete this, right? I said 14 out of 20 points. I should have said, you must answer 7 out of 10 questions correctly, because they are 2-point questions. As a quirk of when I used to do points, I wanted my quizzes to be worth, okay, whatever. So that's the change. That's why I wrote that note there. With no quantitative data, tell students the requirements to complete a quiz. And I'm going to show that to you here. And in order to do this, I'm using new quizzes because this is not possible with classic quizzes. You cannot choose the grading scheme. It's only points for the classic quizzes thing. So this is a new quiz, my chapter check, and it's on the assignment settings page, right? I'm going to choose the letter grade and grading course default. Perfect. You see it's worth 20 points. When I go to build, which is how you actually add questions to a quiz, in the instructions, I will say, once it loads, there we go. So this quiz has a total of 10 questions, right? 1 through 5, 6 through 10. So I need to change this, right? You see a score 14 or higher, I need to change that. So I'm going to change it right now. You must, I'll get rid of the language. I'll say answer at least 7 questions correctly for this assignment to be marked as complete. And I realize I need to change that and put the green button in. So that's fine. So let me click done here. And on the quiz settings, right? So on the tabs up here, one of the buttons is settings, excuse me. One of the options is to, there's, allow multiple attempts, hide results from students. Because I have quantitative data turned off, they don't see any of this stuff. So it really doesn't matter. Of course, I want them to see the questions. Actually, I'm not going to hide results from students. I'm going to let them see everything, because when they take the quiz. So let me go back over here and click preview. There are 10 questions total, and I will quickly answer them, and I'll get many of them wrong. I'm not worried about how I'm getting them right or not. Let's just see if I'm guessing what I get. Okay. The student hits submit. I probably got an incomplete or try again. So I should see that. Oh, I got 0 out of 20. So I saw the points. All right. Let's exit preview. Let's do this again. Settings. Hide results from students. I want to show them the questions. I want to show the responses. I want them to know if the response is incorrect or correct. But let's hide the points. And now let's hit, no, not return. That makes, as you select buttons, it makes changes here. So let me go back to build. And then now let's preview again. All right, let's get some of these correct this time. Yeah, that's too many words. That's the Anasazi. That was Venice. That was the Crusades. All right, so I'm going to stop reading and just click buttons. I wanted to make sure I got some questions correct. Now let's see what I see as a student. Okay, so I didn't see the points there. I don't see any numbers. So that's the setting that I need to make, right? And you can see it. I see the questions, correct or incorrect. Now, I'm not in test student view, so I can't see the score in the gradebook, right? So I should have done that instead. So let me do that. And I think I'll have to go back here and do student view. And then I'll go back and I'll confirm those settings for us. The main point is that I want to make about quizzes is that classic quizzes, which almost all of us use, there are very few folks who use new quizzes. Classic quizzes don't have the option to display grade as. So we can't do, I mean, we can do ungrading. We just have to tell our students, look, you got to get, right? You got to get so many points for it to be completed, considered complete. Okay, while I'm waiting for this to load, let me read Ross's comment. Yeah, thank you, Ross. So, of course, right? One of the things that each of us who are trying to do this has to decide is what's required for a complete. And you can have multiple schemes. You don't have to have only one like I do in this class. You can have a scheme that is for, like I might have a scheme for my quizzes where I want my students to get 100% because it's open book, right? And so there's no reason they shouldn't get a perfect. So I could make it where it's, the only way to pass to complete the assignment is to get 100%. And I might have different schemes for different types of assignments. Okay, so, oh, now I see it finally. I'm in test student view and look at my module page for my discussions with checkpoints. You see the different due dates are listed there, the different items in the module. Reply to topic is due January 21st. I've done that, so there's a little check symbol there. I have not yet done the required replies. That's not due until January 23rd. We didn't see it before earlier because I'm impatient and I didn't wait long enough, but it is there. Okay. So again, this is what students see if you have discussion checkpoints enabled. Now let's quickly take this. Oh, I got a couple of private messages. Awesome. Thank you for using private messages, not to embarrass me with my mistakes in front of the whole group. But I will share, I won't name you, but I will say the person who contacted me about Anasazi not being politically correct, please let me know because I can give feedback or I can actually edit. I use an OER text to make sure I've got the correct word in there. And then thank you also, someone, grade report student, this is from regulation 7252. Instructors are responsible for providing a midterm grade to each student. Those students whose performance is substandard, that's D, F, or NP, formerly not NC, will receive written notice and will be directed to counseling services for assistance. Each campus will be responsible for implementing a workable process. Okay, thank you. So it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be A through F. It's performance is substandard. That's the thing there. And then I can say that providing a midterm grade to each student, I can tell them their grade's always available to them because the grade book is there and they can figure it out. And right, if they want my advice, they can ask that. I also, separately from ungrading, right, I try to keep up with students and track and contact them if they're not participating and do all those things. But that's good to have the word from the words from the regulations. Okay. All right, let me get the wrong ones. All right, Eddie, I'm sure you could tell me the percentage likelihood of randomly guessing each question that I might get some of them correct. You don't need to. I know that you could figure that out. Okay, let me hit submit. Okay. Oh, I got a no submission. I actually got 0. Oh no, I got 1 correct. Ah. Let me look at my grades. What do I get for that assignment? Okay, I got to try again. So I'm not sure what that no submission was in the thing, but in the grade book, I see try again. So that part at least works. Naomi.
Linda had an important question earlier in the chat. What if a student doesn't make the effort to give you their evaluation on their grade? Because I have had that happen when I've required
Yeah.
self-evaluation in groups.
Yeah. Thank you for resurfacing that. So I have to, that's a decision that I haven't done this enough to have an easy answer. I think, and I would tell this to students, I would say, well, first of all, you're not going to get an A because that's clearly not participating and caring enough about the class to deserve an A. So I think what I would do is I would probably do my own evaluation of their work, and then I would not drop a student from a C to a D, and I certainly would not drop a student from a D to an F, but I might drop a student from a B to a C, and again, certainly from an A to a B, because I want them to be active learners, and that includes articulating why they get a certain grade. Yeah. Okay. Let's see, where did my screen go? So that at least worked. And I try again. I don't know why they got the no submission before. More things for me to explore. Okay. Ancestral Puebloan. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Okay. So this is actually me giving you some, I'm going to tell you what my students think about this. And here's what I've got. So in each of the class I mentioned before, I have the final exam that includes a feedback survey. And the last couple of terms, I've asked my students questions about ungrading. And I also have an open-ended question, right? Whatever the things, whatever comments you have about my teaching. So here are some quotes from my students, and then I'm going to show you some quantitative data after this. I think one of the best things that we can do in all of our classes is ask our students for feedback and include an open-ended option. In my classes, this is an anonymous survey, so I don't know who the students are that wrote these things. It's really nice to get the kind of this positive feedback from them, right? Because they are the ones who are affected most by what we do, how we do. So I know that the plural of anecdote is not data, so I need to give you some data as well. I have 2 questions for my students, and again, this is part of the survey. They've got however many 10 or 15 questions. One of the questions I say is, compared to a traditional class with grades for each assignment, how much power do you have in this course to determine your grade? I had 131 respondents, and 72.5% of them said they have more power. The truth is they have just as much as they did before, right? Whether it's points out of 1,000 for a letter grade or whether it's ungrading with a bunch of completes or try agains and then they do that, right? But they feel like they have more power. And an empowered person, I think, is a great person to have as a fellow citizen, a fellow member of society. And the other question I have, compared to a traditional class with grades for each assignment, how much of your effort while working on course activities was focused on learning versus your grade? And my students here, 131 responses, 62.6% said they spend more focus on learning and less on their grade. And when I saw these data right here, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I really like what I'm doing because if they care about learning, then they will, there's no limit, right, to what they can achieve as students if they care about learning. Caring about grades is really tough motivator for long term. I know my own experience. I cared a lot about grades when I was in high school. And then I got to college and I was like, really? I got to do this again because I got to go to graduate school and I got to apply. I got to have a GPA. Why can't they just recognize me for who I am, that I would make a great professor and just let me in? Um, and um, and so that I had a hard time adjusting to academic life as an undergrad. Eddie, I don't know. Had I gone to community college first, would I have been a better student when I got to upper division? Maybe I would have had good teachers at community college because I sure as heck did not have very many when I was an undergrad. I had teachers who were hired and promoted for research. I had teachers who were like, I had the experience where the teacher told us on day one, look to the left, look to the right. One of the three of you is going to pass this class. And, it's up to you to write. They didn't even say it's up to you to decide if you're that one. They just said that, right? So that was the undergraduate experience that I had. I was actually a science major at the beginning part of my undergraduate career. And it was filled with that punitive, um, lump of labor fallacy type of view of learning. And I became much happier once I turned my focus on learning and exploring and kind of then decided what I wanted to major in, those kinds of things. So um, let's see. Let's see. We've got comments and questions, of course. I'm going to go to one last slide here because there are a couple of links I want to give you. First of all, say thank you again for your attendance. I'm Greg Beyer, your distance education coordinator. This QR code, I'm going to put a link, the link to the QR code in the chat, which I wish everyone did anytime we had this type of thing, because it's so much easier to click on a link when you're on a computer versus pull my phone out and try to, whatever. So that link I just put in the chat is the same link that you see in the QR code. And then one other link, a resource I want to share with you, and especially if you are appropriately, and I hope you are skeptical about how ungrading might work in your class or your discipline for your students and their future and all that, I hope that you keep that skepticism. And to help with that, I have I've got a Google Doc that's got a bunch of resources, links to example syllabi and articles and blog posts and stuff by people who have done this. And this Google Doc page here will hopefully answer some of those questions. Some of those resources are by professors in disciplines that have the stacked, right? You have to know A before you can do B, that have that type of sequencing in their disciplines. They have also done ungrading and they've shared their experiences. So please enjoy those things. Let me ask if you have any questions. So I've got chat, but I know that Linda's got her hand raised.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, thank you, Rachel, for sharing. Your college undergrad did not have letter grades, but class sizes were smaller. Yeah.
So
Thank you for the kind words.
Sorry.
Let's see my syllabus. Yeah, I'll pull that up right now. It's good that we do have any disciplines to choose from. Find your people. That's right. Okay. All right. So let me include my syllabus.
Yeah, and my question was, how does that apply for extra credit where students are not all required to do the assignment?
That's a great question. For me, that is so as I was setting this up, one of the things that I had to do was figure out how to handle my assignments that aren't directly connected to my student learning outcomes, right? So for example, I have a pre-course survey, which is where I get to know something about my students. I ask them questions and I get some data for the class. The introductions discussion, right? How do I That's not an outcome. The students have to know how to do discussions in an online class. So I actually gave my students an outcome. I added an extra one, and the extra one is participates. Well, see, it'll be on the syllabus. It's something to do with like is a valuable member of a scholarly community, and I'll put a link to this too in the chat. Um, and I use the Canvas tools. So within a module, you can make things requirements that students have to do a thing before they complete the module. So that's how I make them. I force them to do things. I don't have extra credit. I don't do extra credit. Every assignment is a required assignment. And when students ask me towards the end of the semester, oh, can I do some extra credit to improve my grade? I tell them, no, go back and look at the try again. Look at my feedback. You need to demonstrate that you can do the things I'm trying to teach you to do. It's not points, right? I have one experience that I remember. I used to teach at UCLA, and I had a student who came up to me in one class and said, oh, you should, this is history again, which is a GE, and I assume that my students are not majors, and almost all of them are not. My student came up to me and said, oh, you should give me an A. I said, why? Because I'm pre-med. That was their reason for deserving an A in the class. Now, I was like, no, you're going to get an A if you earn it by doing the work and all that kind of stuff. So that's to me, that's the answer to that question. I don't do extra credit. There's enough work for them within the class to do that. I do give my students choice. So I didn't talk about this today, but the outcome where they the writing assignment basically, which ties very closely to one of my outcomes, they can choose whether to analyze a primary source or they can choose whether to edit the textbook. So I give them some choice in how they do that. I'll allow them to submit multimedia, although I have to change that thanks to the course renumbering. Okay, I know that course renumbering is happening in a lot of our disciplines, and if you don't know this yet, course renumbering means that whatever that group is of intersegmental people, there are faculty at least, community college, Cal State, UC faculty, they decide what the outcomes are for our renumbered courses. We have to have those outcomes. We don't get a choice. That makes sense because we want the courses to be the same across the state. So my complaints are a little bit faux here. But I know from my history classes at CRC, we didn't used to have a writing requirement. Students have to write some number, some 4,000 words or 3,000 or whatever it is. But now we do, thanks to the course renumbering. So I need to be able to define, look, if my student does a 2-minute video and they meet the requirements for the assignment, that should count the same as a 3 or 4 paragraph, right? Whatever thing. Okay, so someone asked about the syllabus language. Let me put this linked here in the oh, I thought I had a short link for it, but I don't. Okay, so you're gonna have to get the long link. Oh, and we're 4 minutes over already. Okay, so when you fill out the evaluation form, please don't say Greg talks way too much and we went over. Okay, so here's what I tell my students, and it's on page, where is it? There it is, assignments and ungrading. So this is from last fall. This is going to be different for me for the spring. I tell them, I want your focus to be on learning. This is the quote that I put right in this presentation. I tell them there are no points for assignments, and I will give you guidance. Of course, I do that. You can resubmit without penalty. I tell them you'll different your course grade. And I say, instead of a final exam, this class will end with a self-evaluation. You will list the assignments you completed, how you demonstrated achievement of our course outcomes, and reflect on your learning journey as a member of this community of scholars as you assert the letter grade you have earned in the class. The evidence to support your self-evaluation will be created by you along the way. Again, my whole point here is I want my students to feel like they are in control, like they are empowered. I want them to understand they have always had the power, and I'm trying to make that more explicit. Thank you, Kristen. Oops. I meant to hit that button, stop recording. And I'll say last time before I hit the recording, I'll say, thank you for watching this recording, for being here. I hope that this has been informative, and you can, of course, follow up any questions with me.